Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final session of what has been a fantastic week for the psychological professionals. I have real pleasure in closing, if you like, our week with a session that focuses on growing our leadership talents in the psychological professions. It's a key part of our national vision, leadership. The other two aspects were around grow and develop. And one of the things that we wanted to do in this session was really offer an opportunity to think about how we can all do leadership in our different roles and in our day-to-day lives, regardless of what stage in our career we are at. Before we move on to introducing our amazing speakers to you, I just wanted to run through some quick housekeeping with you all. So next slide, please. So we would love to hear from you. I'm being supported today by our amazing assistant from our Midlands PPN team, Rebecca Jacobs. So please post your questions in Slido, and you should see that on the right-hand side of your screen. If you've experienced any technical issues at all during this session, our website contact details are there. We'd like to just remind everybody that our session this afternoon is being recorded, so if you do not want your name to appear, please post anonymously. We'll also provide you with some more information at the end of this session about where you can access all the materials and your attendance certificate too. But fundamentally, we'd like you to sit back and relax on this Friday afternoon. Hope that you enjoy the session. Next slide, please. So, my name is Sunny Kelsey-Lillico and I am the chair of PPN Midlands. I'm also the chief psychologist at Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Foundation Trust. When we were thinking about this session, we were thinking about how we could create an opportunity for psychological professionals to come together to think about their leadership talents, not from the perspective of roles, but from the perspectives of experience, of attributes, of styles, if you like, as a way of encouraging us all to step into the challenges and opportunities that are around. And I am really pleased that we have four amazing speakers that are going to share with you their journey through leadership. They're going to think about their own personal reflections and some of the learnings that they would like to share with you all. Next slide, please. So, we will hear from Brad Powell, a trainee clinical psychologist, who will talk about the leadership opportunities that he's been able to step into at all stages in his aspiring career. We will also hear from Amandeep Sumal in terms of her timeline and the diversity of her experience and how she's been able to use her experience to date to step into the leadership challenges that have been afforded to her. We will also then hear from Anna Forrest, who will talk extensively about her role as a professional lead and maybe give us some insight about the challenges of working and leading within an organisation that changed and merged through the very, very early stages of our pandemic. And not least, our keynote speaker. I'm very proud that we have got Dr. Lisa Cameron, MP, joining us today from her constituency offices. Dr. Lisa is one of the only and one of the first applied psychologists that has joined Parliament. She served on a number of health committees and is our party spokesman for mental health. So we are so pleased to have her join us with us today. Next slide, please. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Lisa Cameron, MP. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me today. It is correct. I'm pleased to be joining you to speak about the journey from being a psychologist to politics and my current role as an MP and also as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Psychology in the House of Commons. So quite a journey and not one that I had even thought was possible when I started out as an assistant psychologist in our local hospital before going on to do my clinical training. But I think it goes to show that psychological skills are diverse and extremely transferable. And certainly, given that we use a firm evidence base in our practice, and that we also consider psychological theory and first principles in everything that we do, that those particular skills lend themselves very well in a journey towards policy making at a more macro level right across the United Kingdom. So, as has been said, it's been an absolute privilege for me to become the Member of Parliament for East Kilbride, Straven and Lesmahagow. East Kilbride's where I grew up, and I've lived in the other parts of the constituency as well, down in the rural area towards Lesmahagow. So I have a very key a very key binding to my constituency, and I think that's also very important, being able to stay grounded and having that connection to people round about you. But one of the most important things for me was also working on the NHS front line throughout my journey into politics. And I think that was something that was very valued by local constituents in terms of my understanding of the health service in Scotland and the wider United Kingdom, and of my passion, which has been mental health and disability throughout my career. And being able to transfer that into political leadership has been an amazing journey. But I do think it's a path that I was surprised when I was elected to find out I was the first applied psychologist to be elected to the House of Commons. And at first I said, wow, that's quite amazing, it's a first. But then when I sat back and reflected upon it, what came to mind was, well, why is it a first? Why have more psychologists not trodden that path already into policy making in government across the United Kingdom? Because, as I said, I think the skills are extremely transferable. But also, when I found myself in Parliament, I had so much connection to other members of Parliament right across all of the parties, and particularly those who had come from health backgrounds, were perhaps working as nurses prior to being elected, working as general practitioners or perhaps psychiatrists, and particularly also in relation to my connection to peers in the House of Lords. I have a lot of good conversations with Baroness Hollands, who led up the Royal College of Psychiatry, about psychiatrists and the important experience and knowledge that they can also bring into policy making. So whilst it was a pleasure that it was a first personally, in terms of the wider profession, what I'd like to say is, please, if you have an aspiration to become involved in politics in whatever level you would like to do, whether or not it's local politics at local authority level, or whether it's national politics in terms of Westminster, or if you live in one of the devolved nations, if it's perhaps your devolved parliament, then do understand that psychological experience is extremely important in being able to analyse information that comes in, being able to look at the evidence base, and being able to produce good policy documents in the cross-party work that happens in Parliament. When I arrived, as I say, it was a first. So I started in terms of first principles, applying my psychological knowledge. And I got in touch with the British Psychological Society, who have been a fantastic support in relation to helping build evidence-based policy at UK level through the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Psychology, which we set up and which they provide the Secretariat for. And that's partly because I felt it was really our time, not just because mental health has become to the fore, but because when I looked at so many policy areas, be it education, be it criminal justice and work in prisons, be it housing, local authority issues in terms of poverty and the environment, and social issues, we really need more than a medical model now in Parliament. We need to have that biopsychosocial model, and we can lend very much to that. And I think now we are pushing on an open door, because what's happened through the pandemic and even before is that we know mental health has come to the fore. We know that we have to think about people's care and treatment holistically. And I think that that's very much valued across party. So please, if you're interested, do get in touch with me regarding the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Psychology. We have a programme that runs annually, looking at a variety of different issues. Recently, we've been looking at mental health through the pandemic, child and adolescent mental health services, and also looking at trauma-informed practice for those staff who have been working in the front line of our services throughout the pandemic. We are also going to be examining the government's obesity policy and looking at issues in terms of psychological underpinnings and best practice in relation to that policy going forward. There are many all-party groups. The psychology one is a first of its kind. We've not had one before, so I'm proud of that. But there are so many all-party groups. I am also privileged to chair the disability all-party group. But if you look online, you will see that there are all-party groups for all areas of interest, really, in terms of different health conditions. I think there's one for cancer. There's an all-party group for HIV/AIDS. There's a health all-party group, which is more generic. So whatever your area of speciality is, you may find that you can make a link with the Secretariat of that all-party group, and that they would be keen for you to link into some of their sessions, because we're very much there to represent public opinion and specialist expertise in Parliament, and professionals' opinion from working right at the front line. That's really important. So to have those connections with our all-party groups is very key. The other thing that you might want to look at is whether or not in your realm of psychology any of the select committees in the House of Commons are doing work on issues that you may be able to lend some experience to. And often they call for written evidence to be given, and you can certainly get in touch and provide that written evidence from your expertise and specialist practice yourself. So my journey, I think, into politics was one that may have been a first, but what I wanted to do is to pave the way for others who have specialisms right across all of the different realms of applied psychology, so that we can, yes, work individually with patients in practices right across the United Kingdom, that we can support the NHS in meeting its current and future demands, that we can lead services, but that we can also lead in national policy making. And whatever party someone may be affiliated to makes no difference to me whatsoever, in terms of also making sure that we pave the way for those with specialisms to come into Parliament and to represent communities and to be able to speak with psychological knowledge. As I say, perhaps it's been quite medically dominated in the past. We have lots of medics who have been and who work as MPs, but there's no reason whatsoever that we shouldn't have a broad spectrum of individuals from many different areas, from social work, from teaching backgrounds, from nursing backgrounds, from many backgrounds, so that they can build that knowledge in policy and get good, robust outcomes through the policy that moves through the Parliament. I'm very keen to take any questions that people may have, but I'm also keen that you can contact me through the All Party Psychology group and make sure that you build links, because as I say, we're at the forefront of what we want to do is to support cross-party working and to support good, strong policy making. And we know that the expertise is out there in the field of psychology. And certainly if a psychologist from East Kilbride up in Scotland who didn't particularly have a dream to come into politics, but the path of karma took me there, can make it and can become a member of Parliament, then it's certainly a path that will be and should be open to others who also want to follow suit. So please make sure that you link with the group and also with myself if you have an interest in either psychologically based policy making or you have a keen interest in a particular specialism that you think you could lend to in terms of the policies that are being driven through Parliament currently. I think if we all work together, share our best practice, then that can only strengthen the work that's done through government and also in terms of opposition challenging government to make sure that policy is as strong and as diverse and also as inclusive as possible for the future, and that can only be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Lisa. We're not sure how long you're able to stay with us. I know you had I've had quite a challenging morning already, but I do have one question that, if possible, we'd like to ask you. So it's come through from Paul Lawson, who's one of the experts by experience linked into our PPN. And the question is, how do you cope with the pressures and expectations of leadership in such challenging times?
Absolutely. I think that the background that we've had, well, I particularly had in it was stressful for me gaining access to become a clinical psychologist in the first place. I had to learn when I was working with patients throughout my career to be able to balance my work life and my home life, to be able to reflect on what I did every day and reflect on my emotions and reflect on my interactions and reflect on the team approach to the work that we were doing. And I think all of those skills really have to be harnessed in terms of coping with the pressures of Parliament. But I do think that many of the skills we build as practitioners and also as leaders in clinical settings really stand us in very good stead to do that kind of work and to withstand the pressures. I have a good support network. I've never lost touch with those that I worked with in psychology before I became elected, and also actually still have very good friendships with people I grew up with locally as well. And I think all of that grounds me, and I think leadership is making sure that you're not operating in a bubble, but you're connected and that you can take a step back and reflect and take on board other opinions and then make decisions from there. So yes, coping with stress is part of it, but also psychologists are very good at reflecting and adapting, and that's very key to survival in Parliament too.
Thank you. I think we've had lots and lots of questions in the chat that are coming through.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether or not you're able to stay with us for a bit
another
longer.
10 minutes. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Well, I think we'll ask another couple of questions then, if that's okay. So one question that has also come through. Sorry, my screen has just scrolled. Is do you think that as psychological professionals we can be reticent to take up leadership responsibilities? And if so, how do you think we could overcome this?
I do think that that's possibly the case. I was trying to think why there hadn't been other psychologists who had come through into politics. I think it's so tough getting into our profession in the first instance, that sometimes it can be such a focus what we're doing all of the time in our roles as practitioners, that we maybe don't have time for the broader leadership aspects. So yeah, so I think the challenges in the first instance can make us perhaps a bit over focused, but there's also perhaps a confidence thing. And I do, as I say, when I arrived, I was surrounded by medics and the first applied psychologists. But I think what we need to do is have a mentoring process within organisations that bring people through and bring people through into leadership opportunities. I think it's really important that as part of our training in clinical counselling, health, all of the varieties of psychology, educational, etc., and forensic. Don't want to be missing people out, but you know that I mean the broad spectrum of applied psychology, that we have mentoring, and that we also have mentoring for people who want to go on and do other diverse things. What I would say is when I was working, perhaps there weren't the opportunities that would have strengthened my confidence to move into politics. So opportunities to perhaps become more involved in national policy building at that stage. So I think those types of opportunities should be made available to people, and even through a mentoring process to be shadowing people and building confidence, because sometimes it's our own psychology and perhaps insecurity that holds us back too. But I'd like to see as many psychologists as there are medics in Parliament. That's my aim.
Thank you, and thank you for that call to action as well, Dr. Lisa. And I'm so pleased that actually through your support of us this afternoon, that we have also formed a connection with the PPN to think about how we can actually look to harness those development opportunities, those mentoring opportunities that you've also spoken about, and actually help people hook in to the huge array of opportunities that are actually out there, that are just within people's blind spots, and I think that's going to be a key part.
And if you think about MPs in a sense as being a bit more like general practitioners, because, you know, for an hour we may be talking about transport, then we may be speaking about mental health, then we could be moving on to speaking about international aid. It's very diverse. We can't know detailed information about all of those areas. So we're very reliant upon having connections with those who are specialists in fields. And I think psychologists shouldn't underestimate how valuable it would be for MPs from, you know, a variety of different parties and perspectives to have those connections locally and to be able to tap into what's happening in their local services, but also you know, what the research is showing is best practice internationally and locally too. So those are very important aspects of work that we would always like to have access to as MPs, and often it's people who are working on the front line, like in, you know, psychological practices, who are aware of that information and can build connections to the parliamentary structures in terms of the all-party groups and in terms of the select committees and in terms of their local MPs as well.
Dr. Lisa Cameron, thank you very much for taking the time out on this Friday afternoon to join with us today. We have a host of questions that are coming through, and what we will do is potentially forward on those ones that we know we can't answer ourselves to your parliamentary office, but also signpost individuals to the all-party parliamentary group, because that's grown a lot of interest in terms of the questions that are coming through. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. So thank you to Dr. Lisa Cameron for setting the tone, if you like, for our afternoon session, and that call to action about our opportunities to use our core skills across our practice journey so that we can actually start to influence policy, because that's how we can actually make a difference for our communities. We're moving on now to our next guest speaker. It's an absolute pleasure that I would like to introduce Dr. Anna Forrest. Anna, over to you.
Thanks, Sunny. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be part of this session today. This is me. I work at Cambridge and Peterborough Foundation Trust, who until 2015 were a mental health trust, and since 2015 have been a community and mental health trust. So just to begin with, I wanted to talk a bit about why I got interested in clinical psychology in the first place. And the three faces you can see in front of you are my grandmother, my mother, and Robbie Coltrane as Cracker. Younger members of the audience might need to Google that one. But my interest started because my mother was a nurse and social worker, so always talked about her career in health and social care, and was very much something I was aware of growing up. My grandmother had dementia, and was something that I recall from my teenage years and my early 20s as being something that really struck me in terms of the care that she received and the services that were involved in looking after her. And Robbie Coltrane as Cracker made psychology as a profession look fascinating. I am being facetious about this, but it did give me an interest in something and made me look further. And certainly I knew from when I did my A-levels that clinical psychology was a career that I wanted to pursue. So with that in mind, I proceeded. So this is the boring slide, and it's a potted summary of my career history. I unashamedly gathered experiences with clinical psychology in mind prior to completing my doctorate at UEA in Norwich, and then I qualified and went to work for Cambridge and Peterborough Foundation Trust in the Older People's Mental Health Service. So I started there as a newly qualified clinical psychologist, and that felt like a good fit to me. I'd had assistant psychologists positions in older adults, and I really loved my older adult placement as a trainee, so that felt like the right place for me to be working as a qualified clinician. And I was lucky. I was given career opportunities and stretch opportunities within my various roles. So I did secondments, I was funded to do my CBT diploma, and really I was given lots of opportunities to expand in a leadership role through increased responsibility around line management, opportunities to work on service development projects, and an increased role in the team governance, which led me to my current role, which I've been in for about 4 years now, which is as part of the senior leadership team in an integrated directorate. And when we came together and took on the community services that we took on as part of that integration, I came in contact with staff I'd never come across before. We took on inpatient rehab beds, we took on district nursing services and OT and therapy services working in rehab in the community, and we also took on specialist services, and so I'd never worked with services like that before, so it was a huge learning curve for me about what we were suddenly offering, and the service is big, the directorate is big. We have 1,600 staff under the 9-person senior leadership team. So there's a lot to be done. And I have to say, stepping away from older people's mental health, which had been my comfort blanket and where I had gained all my clinical experience to date, was a huge disruption to me. There were acronyms I'd never heard of before. I was working with a completely different group of people, and I really had to learn the language of physical health services very quickly, and that meant interfacing with acute hospitals and that and how they work with the community and interface with them just in a way that I'd never had to do previously. And then there are personal dilemmas that we all have to face. But for me, my career got interesting at the point where my kids were very young, and I had a dilemma about working part-time and whether I could do it within a consultant role. And that's still something that I struggle with. But I also, in this role, have had to take a step back from the volume of face-to-face clinical work that I was doing previously, and which I always really enjoyed, and having to take on more senior management responsibilities. And so that's been a huge thing to adjust to. And I think the challenge has been about how you can still be a psychologist within a senior leader role. And that's something that I'm still grappling with, I think. And then managing my imposter syndrome is something that I will always struggle with, I think, but it's something I have to make sure doesn't catch me out. So there's been a few aha moments for me in terms of leadership, the first of which was attending a workshop with Pam Skinner. Now, I think this must have been around 2010, where she had been a main contributor to the clinical leadership development framework that the Division of Clinical Psychology had published. But her workshop spoke about decision making and how decisions are made. And she talked about the politics of decision making and who's making the decisions and where they're coming from, and really made me more aware of the kinds of ways that we present opportunities to people and what factors might be influencing the decisions that get made. So that really fired my imagination. I've been lucky enough to do 2 leadership courses throughout my career, one that was about 6 or 7 years after I qualified and the other a couple of years ago. But both of them were an opportunity to step back from my day job and think about myself as a leader, looking at my strengths and my weaknesses and really having an opportunity to work on those. Both of them were framed around the healthcare leadership model, which is this jigsaw diagram that you can see on the right. But both of them have helped me to see the bigger picture and to question my role in things and what I bring to the table. And coaching was the other opportunity that I think was a chance for me to be bolder, for me to get some encouragement and to help see the skills and attributes that I bring to the table. And it really pushed me to do different things in a way that I wouldn't have done without that support. So as I've gone through my leadership career, I've had an increased awareness of systems leadership, and this is something that the Nye Bevan programme particularly was focused on. If you can't read the tiny writing on some of these boxes, that really doesn't matter. Suffice to say that before I went into this leadership role, I was focused on the circle in the middle here, which is the trust that I work from. And I wasn't even focused on the whole of that. I was focused on about an eighth of it. So really, as I've gone through my leadership journey, I've had to understand the context of the healthcare system that we work on and how our organisation interfaces with the other organisations that are part of the system, which are the other components to that diagram. So really, it's about system working is about working together as a healthcare system and not being solely focused on our own organisation's priorities. And that's a really massive difference to how we've done business previously. And it's really looking at the system and the system's performance collectively and looking at how we help each other and how we support each other in doing that. And there's been some fantastic opportunities for that during the pandemic because it's forced our hand to work together because of the challenges that we faced. So for us, it's been around in the early stages of the pandemic and at the peak of the waves, it's been about discharging people quickly from acute hospitals into the community and what provision we could put in place to support that. It was about redeploying staff to the places that they were most needed and flexing our community skills to work with acute hospitals as required. And it was about providing beds for patients that we hadn't previously seen and certainly weren't within our normal service specifications. But for me personally, it was also about using my psychology skills to support different parts of the system that I don't normally necessarily have things to do with, such as offering support to the NHS EI command and control room and thinking moving forward about Schwartz rounds and that we offer internally within our trust, but thinking about how we might be able to work them up at an integrated care system level in the future. So as my understanding of leadership and systems has changed, I think I've really had to think about myself as a leader. And this concept of reflexivity is something that the NHS Leadership Academy really focused on. And it's really about our ability to hold a mirror up to ourselves and take a good hard look at ourselves as leaders and our behaviour and how we feel about that. And this idea of what it's like to be on the receiving end of me is really key in all of this. And it reminds me of a Maya Angelou quote where she said, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel," which is key if we're going to be functioning as compassionate leaders in the work that we do. I think I've been encouraged to look at the NHS constitution and values and thinking about how I really live those. And certainly those opportunities have made me think about my blind spots and where I come from and where I needed to open my eyes and take action, particularly around equality, diversity and inclusion. But I've also had the opportunity to look at leadership from other organisations and in other places, which is really useful, I think, in terms of seeing commonalities in skills required, as well as seeing how different teams operate. And developing networks is critical to doing this, because we need to learn from other places. We need to have diversity of thought in what we do and be able to horizon gaze and look for opportunities. And we're not going to do that learning alone, and we're all grappling with the same challenges very frequently. So who we can call on to help us with that is very important. So I think I've thought about the kind of leader that I would like to be, recognising that all of the leaders that we come across in our life have different strengths and weaknesses. Somebody asked me at an interview what my profile was like, which I was quite shocked about at the time because nobody had ever really asked me before. But as a leader, people are looking to you. So you do have to think about being known and who has access to you, but also you need to be thinking about your values and what you stand for, which is where I've used the Obama and Trump analogy. That final point, start anywhere and follow it everywhere, I thought was a really useful idea, really. And it's from Myron's Maxims, which are about system working. But it's really about beginning wherever you are and not waiting for something to happen in order to take action. And I think that's really important because this is about taking us from thinking about into doing. So my top tips for aspiring leaders: get feedback. And take it on board and really embrace your critics with this, because you're not going to get useful feedback from people who are just going to tell you you're great. So do go to people who you feel less confident about what they think about you and ask them and have support around you in having those conversations. Take it back to supervision and try and unpack it a bit. But this will help you identify areas for development and whilst you may be performing very well, there's always scope for understanding that, yes, but you would be even better if. And that's what I would encourage you to embrace. And that can be a real catalyst to act on whatever feedback that you're hearing from people. So my next top tip would be about addressing your development needs, thinking about an action plan and making sure you're responding to the feedback. And learning opportunities are sometimes going to take you out of your comfort zone, but that's a good thing because it's where we learn the most about ourselves. And certainly in this role, I've had to embrace some tasks and some projects that I never thought I'd be involved as a psychologist, just because they're not things that would classically have fallen into my lap before. I've been involved in the rollout of electronic patient record systems. I'm currently the tech lead within the directorate. So not obvious things that might sit with a clinical psychologist, but are part of the portfolio of work that the senior leadership team need to deliver. And actually they require generic skills, so why shouldn't it be me? The other role I had to take on, which I hadn't anticipated, was being part of the senior leadership on-call rota, which has been another steep learning curve, but a great opportunity to gain better organisational understanding. So I encourage you to seek opportunities and maybe do some behavioural experiments on yourself and try something different and see what happens. And remembering that learning opportunities are really varied, and you don't need to do a leadership course in order to gain a better understanding of leadership. You need to look at the leadership going on around you and see how it works and try and gain from that. So I'd encourage you to talk to people, to ask to go and observe things, be curious and do something new. So where does this leave us? I strongly believe that having a psychology post as part of the senior leadership team in our directorate allows us to influence service development and to bring our experience as psychologists to the table in a way that wouldn't be possible if they didn't have that post. I think this is about recognising that the service users and patients who use our services are people, and wherever they appear in the system, whether that's in mental health or physical health services, it's not an either or, and we do need to think about people in a more holistic way. And that helps us to develop services that get it right for our patients and that are fit for the demands that are going to come in the future. It's about securing funding for services, supporting development for staff, and making sure that we're managing talent within our organisations so that the staff that we're investing in stay. I really hope that the people that we work with have an increased psychological awareness as a result of the conversations that we have. And I hope that means that we're supporting our staff better, that our managers are having more psychologically savvy conversations, and that we're a more compassionate team of leaders as part of that. Being less siloed in how we work is the future, and integration is going to be key to that. So always looking for learning opportunities from other places, because I strongly believe we have more commonalities than we have differences. And this point about being so well placed to focus on staff wellbeing and culture is key, really. During the pandemic, more than ever, there's been a massive emphasis on staff wellbeing and improving the culture of the services that we work on and making them good places to work. That are psychologically safe for the people who work within them, because this is the crux of it, really. Happy staff equals better patient care. So we really need to make sure that we're getting it right in the organisations we're part of. So just to conclude, my leadership journey so far has been interesting and challenging. I'd encourage aspiring leaders from the psychological professions to get involved, as I really believe we have a lot to offer to the healthcare systems that we work in. Thank you.
Thank you again, Anna. Just again, another call for action. The two things I take away are that option of learning from other places and other people, because that's been a key part of what you've certainly done, and also that we could all try and do things differently. And I think that's also been a real lesson for us all. I know that you are able to stay later for the Q&A session, so we'll pick up your questions then. Thank you. So on to our next speaker and our next slide, please, Matt. So it was with great pleasure that I'm now handing over to Amandeep Sumal. Amandeep, over to you.
Thank you, Sunny. Hi, everyone. My name is Aman Sumal. I am a senior cognitive behavioural psychotherapist for Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Services in their perinatal services. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And the next slide. So I wanted to start by talking you through my timeline and having a think about how leadership skills have developed over time. So at the top of the line, you can see my professional qualifications, my academic qualifications, starting with a bachelor's degree in psychology in 2009 at the University of Birmingham. And then that led me to pursue a master's in clinical applications to psychology, as well as doing that part-time distance learning. And I eventually moved into talking therapy services in London. So I did my qualification at UCL and trained as a PWP. So alongside at the bottom, you can see my work experiences. So I was an assistant up until 2012, and then I became a psychological wellbeing practitioner in London services. And I also then did my postgraduate diploma in CBT at the University of Oxford, and then continued to stay in IAP services, working as a CBT therapist up until 2020. So currently I am doing quite a host of different things. I'm a senior psychotherapist in secondary care services in Birmingham now. I'm an associate lecturer in a master's in psychological health for St Mary's University in Twickenham. It's not on this slide, but I'm also a clinical supervisor on the CBT course at the University of Birmingham, as well as different other responsibilities that I hold outside of my NHS role, which includes mentoring on the ACP RISE mentoring scheme for individuals from different ethnic backgrounds. So alongside that, I'm also training in a intervention called video interaction guidance, and that is a bonding and attachment treatment intervention for people with relational difficulties, as well as couples therapy for depression, and also working towards being a BABCP accredited supervisor. So I hope that's kind of given you an idea of my actual timeline and what my career has entailed so far. Next slide, please. So I guess leadership skills aren't something that come immediately after training. When reflecting on what to contribute towards today's presentation, I started thinking about how I felt when I first qualified as a CBT therapist. I remember feeling really overwhelmed after a year of really intensive teaching and supervision, as well as holding cases. So I went from that to holding a full-time job and working full-time with cases and just feeling really, really lost. And for me, the first year and maybe even a couple of years were about consolidating my learning. I stayed within talking therapy services in primary care and worked with different presentations that I found really difficult in anxiety disorders that I couldn't quite get my head around, and gained confidence in those. I used clinical supervision and peer supervision groups to learn more, learn different ways of working, learn different metaphors to use in my clinical practice, and really built my clinical skills up in that time. Next slide, please. And it took a while to build that confidence. It was about gaining my confidence overall. And I think I first started learning that about myself when I could hear, like within the office, people talking about their own clients and, parts of their work and their clinical practice that they were really struggling with, and being able to offer them advice, being able to offer more support and having a voice within the peer supervision groups. I think that's where I started learning that I'm doing okay. I kind of know my stuff now. And that's when I started taking more opportunities within my very large team already. I started, I did a supervision course at UCL and started supervising members of the team. I started taking on duty responsibilities. So there'd be one day that I would be screening referrals, understanding suitability of who would be coming into our services and what would be a suitable case to work with in the remits of primary care. And that's when I started learning about my own interest in perinatal mental health. So working with parents and babies in a really vulnerable time in their life. And I started asking for CPD trainings in line with those interests. I started doing group supervision and supporting our team to build their clinical skills as well. Next slide, please. I was fortunate to be offered a role as a senior psychotherapist in perinatal services in March 2020. The role was unique and they didn't have any CBT provision at that time. So this meant that I had the opportunity to build my own role. And I realized in this time that I am an expert in the way that I practice. So my life experiences, my work experiences, and my clinical experiences make me the person that I am and make me the clinician that I am. So I started learning that about myself and really owning my own identity within my clinical practice and within my role in a quite a large multidisciplinary team. I was then given the opportunity to supervise some of our trainee CBT therapists within the team. And this was the first time that trainees were working in a secondary care mental health service and going on to a CBT course, which was actually aimed towards a primary care setting. So supporting the CBT trainees to be able to do their work and their placement and learn about CBT. I learned about my unique voice within the MDT and really owning and being passionate about the intervention that I could offer. So I offer formulation sessions for the multidisciplinary team, offer case busting sessions and just formulation sessions where we can understand the perspectives and formulate how a woman might be presenting. And also I've had more training opportunities, so learning more about relational psychology and using the VIG method, and also training in couples therapy as well. So we're now able to support men in the perinatal services, which is a really exciting venture within our perinatal services. Next slide, please. And I'm not just building my roles and my skills just within my NHS role. I lecture in a university, giving specialist lectures on cognitive behavioural therapy and about perinatal mental health. I'm a mentor, so I support people in building confidence to take up leadership skills. And this is for someone who is from a similar background to myself. And it's about being able to build their confidence and build their initiatives in taking up leadership skills. I have a new role as a university clinical supervisor, which is really interesting, and it's actually challenged me a lot as well, but also consolidated my own passion and knowledge for cognitive behavioural therapy. I do mental health awareness events in corporate settings. So I recently did an event for HSBC. And I've also started a new role in as being the resident therapist for a directory for South Asian therapists globally. So people can sign up to their monthly workbooks, and I write a piece about the current topic. So last month was about dating and relationships, so offering a psychological perspective of how that might present and how the difficulties that might present in the South Asian community in particular. Next slide, please. So what's next? So within my NHS role, the trainees are now qualified. So although maybe even less than 18 months ago, there was only one CBT therapist, we now have a capacity for 4. What I'm looking forward to is building a CBT pathway, which will be quite unique in NHS secondary care services in the UK. I would like to work towards streamlining between primary care, IAPT, and secondary care services. So building formulation sessions and as part of our common practice, having meetings between these two services and working out what is best suited for the people that we serve, and working towards doing service evaluations and research projects. Next slide, please. So what are my reflections about leadership? Leaning into our clinical skills, building our confidence. Things that are a little bit scary, learn a little bit about that. Learn that about yourself. What is it that scares you about that? And try and do it. Give it a go. Why not you? So find your specialism of interest and lean into that. Ask for training opportunities in that niche. And just keep building your confidence. Identify those gaps in your service, things that people wouldn't have even thought of, and find a way to establish that need, understand it, and work into it. And I think most importantly, and I discussed this in the blog that I posted last month for PPN, discuss these goals in your monthly line management, your ADRs or your PDRs. Make building leadership skills part of your goals and keep reviewing that. I think what I've learned in my role is that these opportunities are truly endless. When I was an assistant, I didn't think I'd be doing this job in particular, but it's literally my dream job. And I learned something new about myself very, very frequently. And sometimes not great things, but I learn my limits and I sometimes surpass them and I do something new. So it's about being able to find the best in yourself and aligning yourself with your values at all times. So I really hope that that's something that you can take away from today's session, being able to find your best authentic self and leaning into that and doing your dream job. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amandeep, and I know that you're able to stay for the rest of the session, so we can have some questions as well. But I suppose what I heard from your session were two things. Were around that sense of, feel the fear, but do it anyway. Step into
Yeah.
that challenge, because actually I think that's a big part of it. And I wonder whether there's something for us all about learning how we can manage our own self-limiting beliefs and behaviors, because I think that is something that we've heard so far from all three of our speakers, that sometimes those beliefs actually stop us from stepping into those opportunities that actually are there.
I completely agree
Thank
with
you.
that. I think there's a fear of being vulnerable, but actually I'm learning to step into the vulnerability rather than rushing away from it. Hard work, but it's worth it.
It is. Thanks a lot, Dominic, and we'll speak to you a bit later. And now over to our final speaker. Welcome to Brad. I'm assuming, Brad, that you are there. So we're coming over to Brad Powell, who is a trainee clinical psychologist. He's got a variety of clinical and research and leadership experience that he's engaged in from student days, really. And one of the things that we're really keen to hear from Brad around are also the opportunities that he stepped into at his aspiring career to date, both in terms of leadership and also in terms of his clinical practice. So lovely to see you, Brad. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sunny. So it's great to be here today. As you know, my name's Brad, trainee clinical psychologist. I'm on placement at West London NHS Trust. So coming on to the next slide, please. So I'm on placement at West London NHS Trust and doing my training at Royal Holloway University of London. Alongside this, I'm also on the British Psychological Society Division of Clinical Psychology Communication Subcommittee, and I'm also a trustee for Male Voice. And one more role that I'm doing is as cohort representative for my DClinPsych cohort. So coming on to the next slide. So starting out as an aspiring psychological professional, I was very keen to develop some skills and experience during my undergrad degree, and sat there in my very first seminar. The lecturer offers us the opportunity to become a student rep. I was sat there thinking, should I put my hand up? Should I not? And no one was putting their hands up. So I thought, you know what's the worst that could happen? So I volunteered and became the student rep, and I learned a lot there about how to gather feedback from the cohort, represent that in a meeting, and then using that to make a difference to my colleagues on the course. And I actually loved this role so much. I was student rep in second year, senior rep in final year. I was then elected as Vice President Welfare and Equal Opportunities on the Students' Union, which was a full-time role. I then did a master's, was student rep again there, and now finally on my first year of DClinPsych training, I'm also a rep. It's probably unlikely that I'll do it again in my second year of training. But really what this has taught me is how each role you will develop new skills and it will lead on to the next opportunity. So it's only having done all of these different representation roles that I was able to step into the trustee role that I have currently, or the committee member role for the communication subcommittee. And you might be thinking, Brad, I'm not a student, I don't have any opportunities to become a student rep. But there might be opportunities for you, say if you're working in a service, to become a wellbeing champion or a diversity champion. There might be other opportunities where you could step in and represent the workforce views in a different working group. And sometimes there might not be a role available, so you might have to create a role or share your ideas. And really by doing this, you'll develop new skills which will enable you to step into the next So if there's any other roles or responsibilities that you can think of, I'd love it if you could share them in the chat. For now, on to the next slide, please. So last year, I worked as a senior assistant psychologist, and I was very fortunate to be able to study the Edward Jenner programme, which is an NHS Leadership Academy course in Leadership Foundations. I'd strongly encourage everyone, if they've got an opportunity, to study it if they haven't already. And one of the key learning points is that leadership is just distributed throughout an organisation. So my initial view of leadership was the person at the top of the organisation, whereas as I studied the course, I started to realise that it's also my responsibility to show leadership, to do my best, and ultimately to do my little part to deliver on the organisational aims and the vision. And once I'd learned this, it enabled me to tackle some of that imposter syndrome that can hold us back from stepping into a role and being our best selves. And even roles and responsibilities aside, we don't need a specific leadership title to be a leader. So my very first role was as a housekeeper at the age of 16. This isn't me on the slides, as you can tell. But one of the things that I learned there is, one, how I had a passion for helping other people. And that's what started me off on this journey to become a psychologist. But really, on reflection, what I learned there is, despite being a housekeeper, I had a responsibility there to have a positive impact on every person I would meet in that nursing home. So if family members would come in, I'd do my best to cultivate a warm and friendly atmosphere. When cleaning someone's table, as this gentleman is doing here, I'd always do my best to try and raise the spirits, because it can be quite a low place at times. So even though I was a housekeeper, probably the lowest banded in the organisation, I was still doing my part to show leadership. So coming on to the next slide. And this is being mentioned before, trying to find a leadership profile that you aspire to. And I'd strongly encourage you to really do that. Find someone who inspires you. So maybe it's Donald Trump or Barack Obama. But really, what you have an opportunity to do here is look at their leadership practice and start implementing that into the way that you do things. And there's nothing stopping you from doing that. So if someone delivers a presentation in a really nice way, or some feedback in a way that appeals to you, then there's nothing stopping you from trying to do the same thing with one of your colleagues. Another example was when I was working on the Students' Union as Vice President Welfare, a colleague said to me, "Oh, the Vice Chancellor, he knows everyone on Starbucks by first name." And I thought that's really quite an admirable trait to have. So that's something that I've gone in and try and put into my practice to raise the spirits and build a relationship with people on the other side of the counter. So asking for feedback on how you can improve, or mentoring, receiving mentorship support, or being a mentor to others is a way to develop those leadership skills. So now I'd really encourage you to think of someone who is a leader that you admire, and think about a way that you could incorporate that into your practice, maybe next week in a meeting or entering the office. Maybe there's something that you could do to start your leadership journey. So coming on to the next slide, please. So things might get in the way. Imposter syndrome, that's been mentioned an awful lot today. And really, what holds us back is our own psychology. And it's quite hard to overcome this, but really, if we don't step forward, if we don't feel the fear and do it anyway, then we're never going to learn about what we really can do or fulfill our true potential. So if you can push yourself and go above and beyond to make a difference, then I'd really recommend you doing that. And maybe asking for support will enable you to step into new roles or try out new ways of being a leader. So on to the next slide, please. And this is why it's so important to push yourself and challenge yourself. So I mentioned sat there in my very first seminar and the lecturer asks, who wants to be the student rep? At that time, I considered myself slightly nervous of public speaking, and I had to represent the views, and I still am slightly, but I had to represent the views of the cohort in certain meetings, but I challenged myself and I was able to develop. And then 3 years later, I was stood in front of 3,000 people at the graduation ceremony whilst I was Vice President Welfare. And had I not challenged myself to be a student rep or even challenged myself to deliver that speech, then I wouldn't have learned about my hidden potential, things that are in my blind spots, which I now know that I can do if I really push myself. So I'd strongly encourage you to really push yourself, because we can always do more than what we really believe. So coming on to the next slide, please. So here are some resources which I thought might be quite useful. So the first one is the link to the Edward Jenner program. The second link is a sort of blog summary, which I produced after writing the assignment for the Edward Jenner program, which highlights my key learning. The third is quite an interesting paper which found if you journal in the mornings and reflect on yourself as a leader, your best possible version of yourself, every morning, if you journal in this fashion, you will start acting in those, you will demonstrate more of those characteristics throughout the day. So I thought that was quite an interesting paper, and it shows that just by journaling, we can make a difference in our day-to-day practice and being intentional. And finally, the Johari window is a model that I learned about in the Leadership Academy, which enables us to learn more about ourselves. And you could use that in supervision or speaking with colleagues. So on to the next slide. So in summary, I hope I got this sense throughout the talk, but I'd encourage you to find new opportunities to develop leadership skills and create your own opportunities if you need to. And even if there isn't any opportunities around you, or you can't find any opportunities that appeal to you, then there's nothing stopping you from showing up as a leader and making a difference to other people, regardless of what role you're in. And by learning from others, finding someone who inspires you, and feeling the fear and doing it anyway, you'll be able to start developing. And that will be an onwards journey that will continue throughout your career, I'm sure. So now I'd love it if you could share your key learning or your key behavioural experiment, either in the chat or with one of your colleagues. But for now, that's everything. Thank you very much.
Brad, thank you very, very much for that. Another inspiring reflection and a great one to finish on. I think two things that came to mind, and we've had a raft of things that have come through Slido, is that notion about what holds us back is often our own psychology. And the other one is that unless we actually step in and start learning from others, how can we release our hidden potential? And those things have come really strongly through, I think, from your talk.
Oh, thank you, Sunny. And as I was listening to the other talks throughout this afternoon, I kept on hearing themes that I was planning on talking about as well. So it strikes me how there's so many similarities throughout this afternoon. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for that, Brad. And now I would like to invite our other speakers that are still on the call to join us, and would like to open up to some panel questions, please. So thank you, everybody, for your presentations, and it was inspiring and heartening to see that the themes that you all talked about were there at different stages in your careers, and also each one of you represents a different psychological professional groupings as well. So thank you for sharing that. We've got a few questions. In fact, we've got quite a lot of questions, so that have come through the chat. But what I'm going to do is just highlight a couple that have come through. So we've heard a lot about the leadership opportunities that are around, but there's been a reflection that how could we have the breadth? So how can across our psychological professional groupings, so not just applied psychologists, but our counselling colleagues, our PWPs, how can all of our psychological tips, please out? Thank you, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. And apologies for that. It's a time where all the teenagers are coming home and pulling on the Wi-Fi. If we can bring the panel members back in, and we will just run through a couple of the questions that we've got through. Apologies all. I am at risk of blaming my teenager. So what I was saying before I was really cut off was, what do you think there are available for the whole host of psychological professionals? What would be your top tips?
I think getting out of your silo is really important. So I think that, just because you work in one service, don't let that stop you going and finding out what's going on in other places. And people will be interested in talking to you about that. And this starts with having coffee with somebody and building relationships and networks and finding out, really. So I would encourage people to talk to people. If there's something you're particularly interested, call them up, ask them if you can meet, and don't be afraid to do that, because people will be happy to talk about the things that they're interested and passionate about, and they'll appreciate your interest, and you never know where those conversations might take you. So I think that would be my starting point.
Great, thank you, Anna. Amandeep, what about from your point of view?
I guess I'd agree that networking is really important, being able to understand yourself and being able to understand what your interests are, but you don't really know what's outside of the box. So if I was to just stick to perinatal and only talk to people within the perinatal circles, I might not know what's outside of those roles. So I guess it's about being able to meet other people outside in different specialisms and in different career roles as well, and sharing experiences and sharing vulnerabilities too.
Thanks.
And saying, oh, actually, I don't quite know how to get further beyond this, and sharing tips in that way.
Yeah, I completely agree
Thanks,
with everything that's been said.
Brad?
Yeah, I completely
Thanks.
agree with everything
I wonder
that's
whether I
been
can come
said.
back to one particular. Thanks, Brad. I wonder whether or not I can say. I wonder whether I can come back to Amandeep, what you were talking about in terms of vulnerabilities. Is there something there that we need to think about in terms of our leadership, about being able to step into a place where we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable?
I think as human beings, do we want to be vulnerable? And in a world where weakness, it's a vulnerability is seen as a sign of weakness, is that something that we willingly show? And I guess it's about finding safe spaces and building safe spaces within the workplace where you can discuss these things. As psychology professionals, we will have regular supervision, or we should be having regular supervision, and using those structures to discuss these vulnerabilities, I guess, and start working towards them, because that's what clinical supervision and management supervision is all about. And particularly our professional development reviews, I think that's a space where you can say, and your manager can discuss with you, this is what you're doing well, this is what I see that you're doing really well, and these are the bits that we could work on and strengthen. So what shall we do about that? And I think we're very lucky as a psychology profession across the board. And I'm not sure, I'm making a very big assumption there that these structures are available to all of our professionals. And I hope that it is. And if it isn't, is that something that we should be putting into place?
Thank you, Amandeep. I think that's been a reflection of some of the questions on the comments in the chat as well, about how structures can actually enable or potentially hinder some of the leadership opportunities that are out there. In our final few minutes together, I wonder whether or not there is anything that any one of you would like to say in relation to something that also has come up in all three of your presentations, which has been around imposter syndrome, because you've all mentioned it. So is there anything there that you would want to share for the audience to think about how you've managed those feelings?
I guess one thing that I found useful is just owning it and just accepting that, I feel a bit out of my comfort zone here, or I feel my heart racing, and by acknowledging it, for me anyway, and accepting it, it sort of says to myself that it's not going to get in the way, and I need to do this to share my story, or make a difference to someone else. So that's something that I've found beneficial.
Thank you. So galvanizing ourselves to help others can often take us out of that zone. Any other comments from Amandeep or Anna before we close?
I think from myself, it's one, just like Brad said, feel it, own it, and then just kind of rush into it and see what happens. Like, what's the worst that could happen? You lose all your dignity? Like, what's that anyway? So I guess it's about making that space for yourself and just testing it, doing those behavioral experiments, like Hannah said earlier, and realizing you can do a lot more than you ever thought you could, and you won't know until you try.
Yeah, and I suppose my final comment on it is to recognise that lots of people have this. So it won't be just you. Is that, actually, I think this is a really common thing, and I suspect it gets worse. Actually, the more senior you become in an organisation, the more you fear being found out for your incompetence. So I think that other people have this too, and that's something that we should all remember. And sometimes we do just have to get on with it, and being vulnerable about it, and like Brad said, owning it. I think that's a very good way of dealing with it.
Thank you, everybody, for your honesty and your authenticity in each one of your presentations today. I'm sorry that Dr. Lees wasn't able to stay with us, but I think all of you have been able to share your individual journeys and given us a bit of a call to action, and hopefully some impetus for people to be able to step into the opportunities that are actually out there. We've got a load of questions that have come through Slido. So what we will do is, after these, we will collate them and we will come back to you and see whether or not you can help us with some of the resolution for that. And we will then ensure that the information will either be posted back through our website, or we'll feed it out through our social media options as well. So a final thank you to all of you for taking the time and helping us celebrate our PPN England Conference Week and providing us with such an inspiring session to finish on. So thank you all. I'm now going to ask Geeta and Adrian to join us. I hope you
Thanks,
agree that actually it has been an inspiring afternoon.
Absolutely agree.
Very much so.
Thank you, and over to you both.
Thank you. I think we were just, before we move into the sort of closure of the conference, we were just going to ask people in the slider on the right-hand side, you should have your evaluation questions popping up.
Thank you for that prompt. My screen just went off.
That's fine. So thank you everyone for being here today. I've found it an excellent session, but if you could just complete your ratings there, that will help us plan for next year. So what a week it's been. Over to you, Geeta.
Thanks, Adrian. I think we've got a slide to share with people. So I think what a great and fantastic week it's been. We've had 3,000 registered participants and great numbers attending at every single session. So I think it's just a big thank you for joining this week. Whether you're a practitioner, whether you're a member of the public or a policymaker, you'll be able to watch all of the sessions again, catch up on anything you missed. And also, I think, encourage people to register to watch over the next 12 months. Just please spread the word. I think it's been so rich. It'd be great to share it even more widely. And I think next slide, Adrian. So I get to start off the thank yous, and in the spirit of purpleness, which is our logo, I just want to say a big thanks to the conference steering group, all of our presenters, all of our moderators and the technical team and the British Sign Language interpreters. I think everyone's worked so hard to make this happen, all the planning and prep and all the presenting on the day. It's been a phenomenal piece of work, and I really hope you've enjoyed it, every minute of it, as I have. Over to you, Adrian.
Likewise, it's been a fantastic week. Just to say, to echo that thanks to everyone involved, but I just want to cast the spotlight on some of the backroom stars of the week. So Jane Thorpe, who's program managed this event and has helped to steer the ship across some choppy seas and bring us into harbour. Fantastic job. Matt Walker, who's smooth talking behind the scenes from the studio, has pressed all the buttons in the studio but without pressing our buttons. Thank you, Matt. And finally to Ella Ray, who really has done an exceptional job around the communications and coordination of the event. So thank you to all three of you, and to all of the other backroom stars who've sort of made the whole week happen. Really, really very much appreciate everybody's input. So we've themed this week around the psychological professions vision and 5 areas of commitment that came from Psychological Professions into Action last year. We'd really like to hear from you about these and for you to get involved in the second phase of Psychological Professions into Action, which we're calling the Intergalactic Bridge. So really use the hashtags on social media, but in addition, for all members of the Psychological Professions Network, we're going to be reaching out to you to ask you how you're putting these commitments into action. And this is because we want to create a sort of public story about how we're delivering on these commitments, so that we can shout about it and also learn from one another, so that if we see something excellent going on elsewhere, we can draw that learning across into our own practice. So if you're not a member of the Psychological Professions Network already, then please do join. And we're going to close the conference now, and we're going to close it by bringing all of our 5 planets, the 5 commitments together. So we're going to go now to our final film of the conference. Hope you enjoy it, and we really look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you very much.
We know. You've seen many a vision come and go. We're trying to do something different here. In 2020, we went on a journey to co-create a more impactful and unified future for the 12 psychological professions so that we can deliver the best possible care and support for everyone in our communities. We had over 1,800 people coming together to share over 12,000 ideas, comments and votes about our vision for the future of the psychological professions and the commitments we must all make to achieve our visionary goals. a vision for the psychological professions. To transform lives and communities by extending and embedding psychological knowledge and practice across the whole of health and care. Here are just some of the commitments. Put people first. Work in genuine partnership with service users, carers, and families to understand their needs and to design and deliver services that meet these needs. Empower people to improve their psychological health and well-being by sharing and communicating psychological knowledge. Support the psychological well-being of colleagues working in health and care services in good times and in bad. Help our communities to thrive by working with communities to make services more transparent, accessible, and responsive. Recognize and respond to wider social factors such as poverty, discrimination, inequality, and trauma that can impact on emotional distress. Address national and local disparities in access to and experiences of psychological healthcare, particularly for ethnic minority communities. Make all health and care psychological by enabling all health and care services to deliver psychologically informed care. By expanding access to the range of evidence-based psychological therapies and interventions to those who can benefit. Unite and increase diversity in the psychological professions. Work together to make a bigger impact than we can alone. Make our psychological professions more representative of the communities we serve. Increase fairness of entry to and inclusion in the psychological professions for talented people of all backgrounds, particularly ethnic minority candidates. Establish clear career paths and development opportunities for all psychological professions. Transform and innovate. Be flexible, brave, and open-minded in adapting our methods to meet changing needs. Tackle inequality of outcomes. Speak up, challenge, lead, and support each other to deliver our vision. Now, we want to make this vision real. We want to bring it down from these visionary planets to our blue and green planet Earth and connect it with everyday life. We are calling this process the Intergalactic Bridge. Over the next few months, join us in creating the Intergalactic Bridge. Tell us what's been working for you and your ideas on how to make this real. We'd love to hear from you.